the West. Western Conference, the 1v8 matchup puts the Vancouver Canucks up against the Los Angeles Kings in what I think is going to be a very good low-scoring series. I think this is going to be tight. Multiple overtime games I see in this series, but who's going to win it? I got a personal bias here, of course, towards Vancouver. Canadian team, can't help it. The home ice advantage here goes to Vancouver as well. The scoring edge, Vancouver. And it's a big scoring edge, too. Vancouver scored more than .66 goals per game more. So better than .66 goals per game more over the course of the season than Los Angeles did. But again, we gotta concern ourselves here with the health of Daniel Sedin. Daniel Sedin is a huge part of that offense. He's not all of it, of course, but he's a huge part of it. So you have to take into consideration the health of Daniel Sedin. I don't believe, from what I read on NHL.com today, I don't believe he's going to be ready for Game 1. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think he'll be a go for Game 1. So you got to watch that. But still, I give the offensive edge to Vancouver. The defensive edge, I got to give to Vancouver as well. The Kings have a good top pair and a shutdown third defenseman, but they don't really have a dedicated fourth defenseman. I mean, playtime might say yes they do, but in terms of stats and effectiveness, they really don't have a solid number 4 defenseman. Vancouver rolls 3 solid defensive pairs, so I don't see how anybody could give the defensive edge here to Los Angeles. It is very clearly in the favor of Vancouver. The goaltending edge. This one I went a little bit back and forth on because I'm a big Roberto Luongo fan. Haters gonna hate, but I'm a big Luongo fan. I had to give the goaltending edge to Los Angeles. Jonathan Quick is a bona fide superstar in this league. He is a stud, and Vancouver has a bit of an identity crisis when it comes to their goaltending. Because, you know, they've got Luongo, but they've got Schneider, and half the fans are calling for Luongo, and half the fans are calling for Schneider. So, somewhere along the line, Vancouver needs to make a choice. I believe the choice, at least for this playoff series, is going to be Luongo. But still, even, you know, it doesn't really matter which one of them it is, either Luongo or Schneider. I'm very comfortable saying that Jonathan Quick and the Los Angeles Kings have the goaltending edge in this series. The coaching edge, have to give it to Vancouver. Daryl Sutter, who's now coaching the Los Angeles Kings, has a sub-500 career record coaching in the playoffs, whereas Vigneault is coming off a Stanley Cup Finals appearance last year that went to 7 games. So you have to give Vigneault and that staff the advantage in terms of coaching. When you come down to the intangibles, I got to give it to Vancouver again. Vancouver, I think, has a fire under their ass because they lost in Game 7 last year. So they definitely are out to have something to prove. They have redemption on their mind, and they've got the President's Trophy in their back pocket. So I think all of those factors give me sense to say that Vancouver has the edge in the intangibles. I am predicting in this series the Vancouver Canucks will defeat the Los Angeles Kings, but it's going to go a full 7 games. I have Vancouver winning the first 2 games at home. I think they're going to come out like a house on fire. So they're going to win the first 2 games at home. I have them splitting games 3 and 4 in Los Angeles. So this is Vancouver with a 3-1 series lead right now. They're going to come back to Vancouver. I think Jonathan Quick is going to steal Game 5. Los Angeles is going to win Game 5. They're going to go back home. Los Angeles is going to win Game 6 on home ice. Got to come down to Game 7 at Vancouver, where Vancouver will come out victorious and win Game 7. That's how I think the 1v8 series is going to go in the West. Moving on to 2v7, St. Louis versus San Jose. I have a personal bias here towards St. Louis, just because I really like what that team did this year, despite what some guy on the comments said that I underestimated St. Louis, which I don't think I did, but it's not exactly like we have a beef about it. But I have a personal bias a little bit towards St. Louis. I'm not a huge fan of San Jose, and I really never have been. So I have a bit of a personal bias towards St. Louis. Home ice advantage also goes to St. Louis. The scoring edge, very slight, but it goes to San Jose. They scored less than .25 goals per game more than St. Louis did, but they did score more goals. They do have a slight edge on the offense. The defensive edge, I have to give to St. Louis. Once again, San Jose is one of these teams that they have a solid top pair and a third defenseman, but they really don't have a dedicated fourth guy, whereas St. Louis has two very solid defensive pairs, headed up, I believe, by Shattenkirk and Pietrangelo, I believe, is their top two defensemen, who both had fantastic offensive years this year. And the worst plus-minus on the team, on the defensive core, is -1. So St. Louis has a lot of depth at defense. They have a lot of big-minute guys, and so I have to give the defensive edge to St. Louis. Goaltending edge, no question, goes to St. Louis as long as they pick a lane. You've got to decide who your starting goaltender in the playoffs is. Is it Yaroslav Halak or is it Brian Elliott? Halak got more playing time through the year. Elliott had better numbers. In my opinion, Brian Elliott is this team's starting goaltender. And I believe he should start Game 1 of the series. I don't think that that decision has been made yet, but St. Louis needs to make a choice and stick with it, because San Jose's got a pretty damn good goaltender themselves in Antti Niemi. So that actually made it hard. I actually wanted to give this to Niemi, but I was like, you know what? They've got St. Louis has 2 number 1 goaltenders, so I really can't give them the goaltending edge. So I had to give it to St. Louis, but I acknowledge that they need to pick a lane and decide who they're going to go with in terms of who is their starting goaltender on this team. The coaching edge, I have to give it to St. Louis. McClellan coaching San Jose, he has found success, of course, but you have Ken Hitchcock on the other side. He's won a Stanley Cup with Dallas. He has boatloads of experience. I have to give it to Ken Hitchcock. Sorry. So Hitchcock, I give the coaching advantage to St. Louis. As far as intangibles goes, I bounced back and forth on this one a little. I actually ended up having to give it to San Jose. San Jose's window is closing, and they know this. Their window's been closing for a couple of years. This might be one of their last chance, because you're talking Joe Thornton. Joe Thornton's getting up there, and Patrick Marleau's getting up there, and the window for this team may very well be closing. So this might be one of their last shots to get it, and that makes a team very hungry and very dangerous. And the fact that most, myself included, wrote them off around mid-March, saying, oh, this team's playing shit hockey and they're not going to make the playoffs. And that was the point that they really turned it on and ended up not only making the playoffs, but getting the 7th seed. So I think the intangibles definitely goes to San Jose. As far as who I think is going to win the series, I've got St. Louis winning this series, and I've got them winning it fairly handily in 5 games. I think St. Louis is going to win the first two games at home, games 1 and 2. Games 3 and 4 in San Jose, I expect to see them split, to have St. Louis come home for Game 5 and win it on home ice. St. Louis, I believe, only lost 7 or 8 times this year at home in regulation, so, they're a pretty damn good home team. So I got St. Louis winning this series in 5 games. Go into the 3 versus 6 matchup. In the West, we have the Phoenix Coyotes and the Chicago Blackhawks. Personal bias, I don't have one. I'm indifferent to both teams. I could really care less about both teams. I don't like either of them. I don't hate either of them. So there's really no real personal bias there. Home ice advantage goes to Phoenix. Scoring edge goes to Chicago. They scored well above .33 more goals per game through the course of the season than Phoenix did. But this is another situation where the health of one of their superstars, namely Jonathan Toews, is going to play a factor in the effectiveness of Chicago's offense. I still give Chicago the scoring edge, even if Toews isn't ready to go. I still give them the edge in scoring with guys like Patrick Kane. The defensive edge, have to give it to Phoenix. Chicago boasts a really good top pair with Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook, but they depend on them. We're talking 30-plus minutes a game, and that's a lot of ice time and a lot of wear and tear through the course of a season. Now, Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook are both bona fide superstars at the defensive positions. However, after the two of them, Chicago doesn't really have a lot on defense. Whereas Phoenix, I believe Phoenix has the depth to survive an injury to one of their top two guys. I think your number 3 or number 4 guy can move up that spot, and Phoenix is still as effective. So I have to give the edge on defense to the Phoenix Coyotes. Goaltending edge, have to give it to Phoenix without a question. Mike Smith has really broken out as a big-time superstar in this league. The same kind of, like, you know, he's a Jonathan Quick-like superstar. He's a really underrated guy, owned and started in like less than 50% of fantasy leagues, if I remember most of the season correctly. But he is a definite superstar in this league. Whereas for Chicago, Corey Crawford and Ray Emery both kind of struggled this year. Crawford especially was not himself. So I have to give the goaltending edge in this series to the Phoenix Coyotes. The coaching edge goes to Chicago. Joel Quenneville's only 2 years removed from winning a Stanley Cup with this team, and Phoenix as back-to-back first-round playoff exits. So Joel Quenneville absolutely gets the nod for the coaching edge for Chicago. And in terms of intangibles, I think I got to give the edge to Phoenix. Phoenix has a lot of confidence in their goaltender, Mike Smith. He could very well steal a game or two. And I think there's still this idea that Phoenix is playing for the life of their franchise, because people are still talking, oh, well, you know, Phoenix could very well move next year. So they're playing for the life of their franchise in Phoenix. So I think that is going to end up translating into success this year, and I believe that the Phoenix Coyotes will, in the eyes of some, upset the Chicago Blackhawks in 6 games. I've got Phoenix winning games 1 and 2 at home. I have Chicago winning games 3 and 4 at home. I have Phoenix winning game 5 at home, and Phoenix closing out the series in game 6 on the road. So I've got Phoenix beating Chicago in 6 games. To the last series, the 4 versus 5 in the West. The Nashville Predators taking on the Detroit Red Wings. And I know everybody is on Pittsburgh and Philadelphia as being the series to watch. This is going to be the series to watch. If you watch one playoff series this year, make it Nashville-Detroit, because this is going to be the one to watch. I had to take a drink because we got a lot to talk about. Personal bias, I don't really have one. I like Detroit, but I don't dislike Nashville. So I don't really feel like I have much of a personal bias in this series. Home ice advantage, of course, goes to Nashville. The scoring edge, barely Detroit. Detroit scored, it was actually quite a bit under 0.2 more goals per game this year than Nashville. I think they only scored 10 or 11 more goals on the whole season, more than Nashville did. So Detroit has a slight offensive edge, but it's almost negligible. Defensive edge, I couldn't decide. I couldn't pick, because it's Detroit's got balance. They have 5 defensemen with at least 20 points. So Detroit's got balance. But Nashville's got depth. They have a very good top pair, but then they have 5 other defensemen on that team that could really step into the 3 and 4 slots behind their top 2 guys. So what do you favor? Do you favor balance or do you favor depth? If there's an injury in the equation, you got to favor depth. If there isn't, I would almost say I favored balance. So I really couldn't make a pick. I couldn't decide whether I liked Detroit's balance better than Nashville's depth, so it had to be a push. I don't give a defensive advantage to anybody. Goaltending edge. And this might piss off a lot of people. I don't think there is one. Pekka Rinne is a superstar in this league. No question about it. He's a great goaltender. Anybody that says anything different is just showing Detroit homerism. Rene is an excellent goaltender. But so is Jimmy Howard. It's not like Jimmy Howard had a bad season this year. Jimmy Howard had a very good season this year. Jimmy Howard's a stud too. These are two very good goaltenders. Howard may or may not be 100%. It's sort of the same thing with Pavel Datsyuk. May or may not be 100%. They both feel like they've kind of been coasting. So he might not be 100%, but Pekka Rinne played a lot more this year than he had to. Pekka Rinne played 72 of the 82 games, I believe. And, Nashville has a good backup in Anders Lindback. He's had good seasons in the past and had a good statistical season this year for the little bit of playing time that he got. So, you safely could have taken 5, 6, maybe even more of Pekka Rinne's games, given them to Anders Lindback, and Rinne would be a little bit fresher. So, I had to take all this stuff into consideration, and I don't think either team has an advantage in terms of goaltending. So that's got to be a push, too. Coaching edge. Barry Trotz versus Mike Babcock. It's a push. I don't give the advantage to either one of them. Both of them are long-tenured coaches. They have a lot of success. They have good staffs around them. I have to give it a push. And the intangibles. I had to give it to Nashville for only one reason, the intangibles. The Radulov factor. Radulov has come back from the KHL, 7 points in 9 games. He's the only forward on the Predators roster that was really close to a point a game. Radulov comes back and the whole game changes. He is that kind of player. I have to give the edge in the intangibles to Nashville, just based on who do you put on Radulov? How do you stop the guy? Who do I think is going to win the series? Most of the analysts are on Nashville. Can't lie. It kind of surprised me that more of them weren't on Detroit. It was too good not to take it. Detroit Red Wings, I'm predicting, will defeat the Nashville Predators in 7 games. I think this will go the full distance. I believe they will split the first 2 games in Nashville. I believe Detroit will win games 3 and 4 because they're like St. Louis. They only lost 8 or 9 times this year in regulation at home. I think Nashville will go home and win game 5. I think Nashville will come into Detroit and actually beat Detroit on home ice in game 6, leading us to game 7 in Nashville. You have the Detroit Red Wings, Nicholas Lidstrom, all these players that have so much playoff experience. In a Game 7, I believe Nashville will crumble. Detroit beats them in Game 7 to move on to the second round of the playoffs. Those are my predictions, kids. Let's run over them one more time. Eastern Conference, 1 versus 8. I have the Senators beating the Rangers in 7 games. Eastern Conference 2 versus 7. I have Boston defeating Washington in 5 games. Eastern Conference 3 versus 6. I have New Jersey defeating Florida in 6 games. And Eastern Conference 4 versus 5, I have Pittsburgh defeating Philadelphia in 6 games. That would set up the following playoff series for the second round. Number 2 Boston versus number 8 Ottawa, and number 4 Pittsburgh versus number 6 New Jersey. Western Conference 1 versus 8, I have Vancouver defeating Los Angeles in 7 games. Western Conference 2 versus 7, I have St. Louis defeating San Jose in 5 games. Western Conference 3 versus 6, I have Phoenix defeating Chicago in 6 games. And Western Conference 4 versus 5, I have Detroit defeating Nashville in 7 games, which would set up the following playoff series. Number 1 Vancouver versus number 5 Detroit, and number 2 St. Louis versus number 3 Phoenix. Those are my predictions for the first round of the NHL playoffs. I know everybody's got a lot to say about them. Hit me in the comments section below the video. Like the video. Subscribe to me to continue seeing these videos as the playoffs roll along. That's it for me. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, chilling with the big gold belt in the background. My Halifax Mooseheads are down 0-2 in their series to the Quebec Ramparts. Patrick Waugh's Quebec Ramparts. Need a lot of luck. Need that hometown advantage. Halifax, get out there, watch that game. Game 3 goes, I believe, tonight, and Game 4 goes on Wednesday. Get out there, get in to see those games. Mooseheads need you. Those are my predictions, and happy playoff hockey.